Play Saves the World, Episode 3, Wired for Play.
Yay!
Hey everybody, welcome to Play Saves the World, an ongoing conversation about the meaning of play for human flourishing. My name is Daniel Hilty.
And my name is Kevin Taylor.
And we are so glad to have you joining us today. Whatever is going on in your world, whether you are driving a car right now or working out or doing laundry, speedboat, hovercraft, in the International Space Station, wherever you may be, it's great to have you tuning in. We thank you so much. Kevin, how are you?
Good. How are you? Just thinking about the space station.
I'm pretty sure no one in the space station is listening to this, but that would be cool. I wonder if they listen to any podcasts in the International Space Station.
I bet they do. I'm sure. How do you roll dice in zero gravity?
That would be wild. That would add
You'd
a
have
whole
to ask
other dimension.
Hal to roll the dice. How?
Right.
Roll a d6.
That's not logical, Kevin. No, that's
Oh.
Well, yeah. Wherever you are and however you're listening, we're grateful that you are here. And Kevin, I'm glad you're doing well too. Today we're talking about what it means to be wired for play. And leading up to this discussion are our two previous episodes. We, over the last couple episodes, have talked about work and play and kind of comparing the two. We've talked about how we've kind of explored together how play is this non-instrumental, meaning not a means to an end reality in life. It's voluntary, it's unnecessary. That's kind of essential to what makes play. It is unnecessary, and yet it sure seems like it's necessary. And that's what this episode is about, right? Kind of exploring the necessary, unnecessary, the play, the role of play in human flourishing. Does that sound like kind of a good recap of where we've been so far, Kevin?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The miracle and mystery of play. Yeah.
Miracle and mystery of play. And how we seem to be wired for play, even though from a certain perspective, it can seem largely unnecessary and superfluous to life.
Yeah. Yeah, that it's something that you grow out of. It's a childhood thing that you grow out of, is what we tend to think.
Right. And as we'll discover in this episode, it may not necessarily be the case, but it sure is what we're taught.
Not the case.
No, it's not the case.
It's not. Lies. Deceptions.
And it's not just part of being human, right? It's also part of being alive. Right, Kevin? This is something we were kind of sharing beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's this evidence that other mammals play on various levels. And, of course, that's obvious with creatures that we take as pets, so cats and dogs and other creatures like that. But we see it with octopus. We see it with orcas who are randomly attacking yachts and boats, and we're not sure why. We meaning the scientist community. So I really mean they, because I'm not a scientist. But people that are questioning it, one theory is that they're kind of playing, that it's almost like teenager vandalism, that some of the orcas started attacking yachts and sinking them, and then others just decided, gee, that looks like fun. Because it's a superfluous thing. They're not endangered by the yachts. It's not a food source. Why are they doing it? So octopus will throw a ball to you in the water with people, evidently, aquatic folks that interact. Yeah, there's the videos of it that they understand those types of games. My cat, who's very, very, very dumb, likes to play on a limited level. So despite really being pitifully stupid.
I would hate to play a game of catch with an octopus because I would think with my 2 arms compared to its 8 arms that it would outcatch me like all the time.
Yeah, but it's underwater, so it's not like you can do a fastball.
Okay, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, animals play. Obviously, young animals play like young human animals, creatures play. They play more often. Little kittens, little puppies play a lot. But adult puppies and adult puppies known as dogs and grown-up kittens, aka cats, new category, they also engage in play and playful
Yeah.
activity. And sometimes, as we said before, sometimes it overlaps with work. So the cat might enjoy hunting as well as it's a food source, but sometimes they hunt and play just for fun.
Right, right.
Yeah, so
How can you tell
animals do
when
it too.
Yeah. How can you tell when your cat is playing, talking about your cat and its desire to play?
You know, cats are interesting, and I've been watching videos and never thought of this, but they don't have facial muscles. So they can't respond like a dog and others do with their eyes
Right,
or their
right.
mouths or something. So you have to
Right.
watch the tail and kind of their body gestures.
Interesting.
So she kind of gets on her back and holds her paws up a little.
Okay,
You can
okay,
watch
that's
her
like
tail. The tail of a cat is their main communicator, besides
okay,
meow.
okay, okay.
So if
Interesting.
the tail is up and crooked at the top, like a walking staff or a bishop's, then they're usually happy. If it's straight
Okay.
up, they're kind of upset.
I didn't know that. Okay,
Yeah, so watch
That's
the
cool.
tail.
okay. I also
Yeah,
thought about the
but-
fact that dogs do have facial muscles that allow them to give kind of almost very human-like expressions sometimes, but cats
Yeah,
don't,
they do
do
that.
they? Yeah, yeah, the big puppy
They
eyes.
can do the eye roll.
Yeah, yeah. And then you give them the piece of food that you're eating.
Right.
because They look like
Right.
they're asking why you hate them since you don't give
Yes,
them the
we
food.
see it with animals, but it plays out really particularly with human beings.
Right, right. In fact, playfulness and play seems to be kind of a universal part of the human experience. It's, like you were saying at the beginning of the episode, Kevin, so often today we think of play as something exclusively just for children, but the truth is that, looking back over history and archaeological records bear this out, and historical records bear this out, and people who know a lot more about such things than I do, that play and playfulness has been an essential and universal and ubiquitous part of the human experience since the very beginning, and not just for children, but for adults too. Just some different examples. One very famous archaeological find was the royal game of dating from like 2500 BCE. Folks familiar with the Bible, is, I guess, most famous in the Bible. It isn't the land that Abram and Sarai come from. But I've always thought that sounds like almost like a Dr. Seuss kind of land, just the land of It sounds fairy tale-ish. But there is this ancient game that I think people still have tried to play, at least today, or at least figured out how to play. And I guess that's the problem with a lot of games that are discovered from ancient history. What you don't find with them are the rule books. And so,
Right.
the
Paper is
rule
not
books,
invented.
probably. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And so trying to reconstruct how to play a game, which would be interesting. I mean, interesting thought. Just, if you opened up a box of Pandemic or Monopoly or Raiders
Yeah, it
of the
would be
North
baffling.
Sea
Absolutely
without
baffling.
any instructions. Yeah. And like, how do you play this? Try to reconstruct that.
That's interesting, and I would say it would be impossible to figure it out because
Yeah,
there'd just be
yeah.
no clue
Right,
to the wind
right.
conditions.
So who
you're
knows if
looking
we
at a
figured
Monopoly
out?
board.
Right, right.
Yeah, and the other great example is from Egypt, and that's Senet, Senet,
Yeah.
and that's a game that appears in some hieroglyphics of the Egyptians. So there's an image of them for Horus. the god Horus, and there's a Senate game somewhere, and
That's
they
so
loved them
cool.
so much that they were buried with them. But
Wow.
we like these old games. We don't know how to play it. We know
Right,
the
right.
board. We have them. We have the pieces, but how it actually is played is only a theory.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And again, an example. I mean, the gods played it. Adults were buried with it. It was not understood to be something primarily for children, right? It was
Right. No,
part of
no
the adult
children were
human
shown
experience.
playing it.
Even the gods,
Yeah.
as you said. Yeah, yeah. And of course, this universality of the spirit of play extends beyond games. Of course, the games are oftentimes the most immediate example of play and playfulness. Barbara Ehrenreich, who I think is, I realized I found out just recently passed away, but she's most famous for her Nickel and Dimed book.
Okay.
But she also wrote this book called Dancing in the Streets with the best subtitle of any book I know. The title is Dancing in the Streets. The subtitle is A History of Collective Joy.
Wow.
Which is just, isn't that a great subtitle? But you know what? Her book is just about this, again, universal human experience of in all parts of the world of when you get people together, sooner or later they seem to have these experiences of dancing in the streets, of just these kind of collective dances and parties that happen in the streets. And I'm just starting to go through her book, so I haven't read it exhaustively, but just this sense that it even though it's a universal experience, it's generally seen more favorably outside of the West, though it happened in the West as well. May Day celebrations and and other celebrations before Lent and things like that. Pardon me. But generally, kind of seen with more suspicion in the West, even though it's more of a part of it. But it is, yeah. Let's go ahead.
And she does she consider dancing and festival a game or play?
I think I'm probably bringing that word to it more than she does. But yeah. But I would say that certainly seems to be within the spirit of playfulness as we've been talking about it. It's this unnecessary, voluntary. Yeah. Not necessarily a means to an end. But just this kind of bubbling over of, though it doesn't take, though it's not without organization, as you have pointed out, Kevin.
Right.
Playfulness doesn't mean, she says, it takes a long time to bring together these people and create the costumes and, and choreograph the dances. And so there's structure to it, but it is, a spirit of playfulness. So that's, since time in memoria, or time in memoriam, or whatever the correct form is there. Anyway, it's been around a long time.
You're doing great, Daniel.
Thank
really
you.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, called recognized, I think sometimes as like the first Western historian, at least that we know of, talks about the invention of games. Is this apocryphal? Yes, sure it is. It probably it didn't happen this way, but writing about 450 years before Christ or BCE, tells a story about the kingdom of Lydia in Asia Minor, what's now Turkey, where there was a famine, and in order to help alleviate the suffering of the people who were starving, the king invented games. And so the king decreed that one day people would eat food and the next day people would play games, and they would alternate back and forth to get their mind off of their
the food last. Yeah.
Starvation. Yeah. But again, that's a very adult thing, right? Not a child thing. We see, these classic ancient games of chess, like chess and Go and backgammon and Mancala, played just organically in ancient communities in Africa and Asia and the Middle East. And then probably one of our favorite examples, I think, Kevin, is, remember good old King Alfonso?
Such a good dude.
So,
That's King Wenceslas.
oh, good King
I don't.
Alfonso went out
The
to
King
ride a
Alfonso went to play chess on a certain day,
Yeah, I think I
but
think
he
that's our
lost
next
his
Christmas episode.
bishop and executed his enemy. Don't play chess with the king. Dun, 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 dun. That's
So,
yeah, we made that up.
why do we remember King Alfonso? What's his thing?
Because he wrote a book about games in the 1200s.
Yeah,
A little
yeah,
bit about theory and even life being kind of a game, right?
yeah. That's right. Yeah,
So it's a
and
manual of games, and it shows this real flourishing of Christians and Muslims together playing chess. It's
right.
mostly about chess, but includes birds, right?
I think yeah, a
Falconry, I
few
think.
others, but so many examples about chess. But yes, illustrations
Hmm.
that, as you said, had people from various religious backgrounds coming together, women and men, and again, predominantly adults playing.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, playfulness is just huge in human culture. There is no culture without some organized play, and that would include sport, some kind of athletics, which is really interesting because there you've got people engaging in play and then people watching, which you can do with games, but it's probably a little less common. You
right,
don't have
right,
arenas of thousands of people watching some people play a game. But there's
right.
like a second level derivative vicarious playing by the audience who watch the play.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
That's a
really
good
interesting.
example. The Olympics and
Yeah, the
such.
Olympics. We think about so many things from the ancient world. The old, all those games that they do track and field are really old games, right? Throwing the shot put and throwing the hurling a spear type thing, jumping over hurdles, just very
Right, right,
basic concepts, run and jump. And we
right,
still play
right.
those games and still compete. How high can you jump? High jump, it's known as, I believe. Used to be called low jump, but people confused.
It was a bad naming decision. Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah,
Well, there was a competition for a low jump, and
yeah.
it was, if I recall, it was 1922, Charlie Spondico.
Yes,
And he
yes.
just laid down and took a nap, and he won. And they realized that the game was broken.
It was, yeah, that's right. I forgot all about
You
that,
remember
but
that?
yeah,
Yeah.
that was, yeah, yeah. Uh, he was.
Old Charlie.
I think also because people felt like he was. No one could do better, right? Like he had achieved the lowest jump possible. That
Because he never rolled over. He just kind of
except
slumped.
yes. Do you remember though? There was that there was the American team that actually tried to they dug a little bit, like they dug ditches to lay in
Yes.
to get a little bit lower than
get a
Charlie
little
Spendico, but then
Yeah.
they ruled that out as cheating, right?
Well,
Remember
that's
that?
cheating.
Yeah, yeah.
So
There
no
was-
shovels or trowels permitted. There
No,
was a doping incident where people were doping with dope to stay asleep longer, and that was banned as well.
right,
That was the doping
right.
incident of 1942.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Yeah. Low jump would just,
Low jump.
which is a shame, because not to pat my back too much, but I feel like that's something I could have really excelled in.
You could
But,
have done well in, yeah.
I feel like I've
Just
got good
born at
gifts
the
for
wrong
that,
time.
but no, yeah. It was not to
Exactly,
be.
exactly. So playfulness is a major part not just of human society and culture and civilization, but also our creative and cultural achievements. So
Yeah.
we see that in some various examples.
Right, right.
And you've especially done some research on this. So talk some about this.
Yeah, yeah. So I am kind of embarrassed. I'm talking about two books here that I've just haven't made it to the end of yet. But another book that I've been enjoying reading recently is called Wonderland: How Play Made the Modern World. Wonderland: How Play Made the Modern World, which might be a neat dedicated episode in the future of In Play Saves the World, written by a gentleman named Stephen Johnson. But the central argument of his book, as I've understood it so far, is that these playful, creative, imaginative impulses that we have seen throughout history, that serious history is often quick to dismiss because it doesn't deal with wars and rulers.
Edicts edicts.
Edicts. That's right. Those kind of playful, imaginative impulses are oftentimes behind the forces that really have shaped who we are today. And
Such as?
yeah, well, one example he talks about is fashion. Now we can get into this in some other point at some other episode, but I think fashion, the argument can be made pretty well, is a playful thing, right? I mean, clothing is a necessity, but fashion, it is unnecessary for my T-shirt to have emblazoned across it Kakashi from the Naruto anime series. That is fashion. But I do it, right? Because it's playful, it's fun, it's unnecessary. And so he talks about the rise of fashion, and specifically in the West, these places, these stores where you could buy the latest fashion, the rise of these in the 1700s in the West, as really creating the context, the environment that gave rise to our modern capitalist system. This idea of where we basically, so much of us in the West, we shop and consume as a pastime, right? As a recreation, and that is an invention of this kind of playful impulse for fashion. This totally unnecessary thing that came out of the 1700s. But it's interesting. He also talks about, so come with me, if you will. Picture it. The 9th century Baghdad. There were three well-known engineers and scientists who have come to be known as the Banu Musa brothers. The Banu Musa brothers. This was at the height of the Islamic Golden Age. And so many advances in science and mathematics and engineering. And they create these schemes, these plans, these schematics, these plans for what we would essentially call kind of robots today, like these little robotic toys, elephants and giraffes and things like that, mechanically, that kind of can walk in. As I understand it, they weren't necessarily made, but they were planned out. And then this impulse to kind of make these automatons carries throughout much of history. It was very popular in England in the 18th and 19th century. There was something called Merlin's Magical Museum, a guy named Thomas Denton. And one of the ideas that came to prominence of this idea of making automatons that could do things was, well, what if we can make the automaton do different things? For example, like write in a book. What if we could get it to write different things in a book? And then this gave rise to the idea of what contributed to the development of the player piano, or punch cards, where you put in different, basically, what are you doing? You're putting in different codes, right? And so then the idea of coding purely for playfulness is kind of the forerunner of the computer revolution, right? Where we get
really,
into
you mean like
Lovelace
the player
and
piano,
things like that.
Yeah, or robot.
Yeah, well, but first, the idea of using a play card, a punch card, which is usually these playful things, these toys. Someone came up with the idea of using it on a loom, and this is then how we create different patterns on a loom much faster than somebody can do it by hand. And then, but it's the germ of the idea of coding, right? And then this coding,
that's crazy.
So yeah, and it also came from the world of music, all of this stuff that now is so much of what gave rise to the computer age that we're in, has these roots in coding, the idea of coding that was developed for playfulness and for toys. Yeah.
That's quite a story. And side note, the Banu Musa brothers, I'm pretty sure that's the basis for an upcoming board game from Garfield Games, and that's Inventors of the South Tigris.
Is that right, really?
Yeah, your design, and it's what you're describing. You have to design, test, and build various schematics for these machines.
That's amazing.
That's the game, yeah.
That's
So
so
it's interesting
cool.
because one person can design it, but then you could end up building it. So there's a lot of sort of
It-
cross playing of is it worth it for me to design, test it? You have to test them as well. Design, test, and build my own, or do I just do yours?
Is
Evidently,
that
you
it?
can play off
Is
each
that
other.
available for pre-order now for Kickstarting?
It has been kickstarted. I don't know. It may have finished already.
Okay, what's it called again? I'm sorry.
Inventors of the South Tigris.
Inventors
So
of the
they've
South.
done three. This is their third game in the golden age of Islam in Baghdad, as you were saying, in the 9th century or so. There was scholars.
Yeah.
Well, no, there's wayfarers, scholars, and now inventors. All of the South Tigris,
That's great.
because
That's
they had the
great.
West trilogy, and they had the North trilogy, and so the East trilogy. And that's a big question of, are they going to do China, Japan, India? What are they going to do for the East trilogy? They have not announced it.
Wow, that's so great. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
Another
yeah.
game I've heard about this reminds me of, and listeners, if games are not your thing, that is totally fine. Kevin and I talk a lot about games. The predecessor,
It's our first love, but
yeah, the preceding podcast behind this was Board Game Faith, about games specifically, but this is more about more than games. But another game it reminds me of, I just heard of, Kevin, it's called Ava's Dream. It's on, I think, it's being crowdfunded right now as well. It's about Ava Lovelace, one of the pioneers in Britain for coding, what kind of gave rise to the idea of modern computer coding as well. And I think it takes a little bit of a fictional approach, because I believe she died early, and this was an idea that what if she did not die early? But in that game as well, you it's not only a worker placement, but you are programming simple machines and seeing whether those programs work or not. And
wow.
so kind of a similar idea as well. So
And
much,
it's-
so
that
much of
takes us to Google Calendar. That's crazy.
yeah. It's great that games are recognizing a lot of these pioneers in coding and programming that most of the world doesn't think about, that I don't think about.
Yeah, so you play as the basis for fashion, as you said, as for science and coding. Play as a basis for, I guess, even cooking, which is one distinguishing marker of human beings, is we cook.
Right.
Like we
right,
create dishes that are beyond what we need,
right.
just
right.
nutritionally.
It
And
is
so
unnecessary.
cooking is very much a playfulness. What if I put, if I take this salty ham and add it to this cantaloupe, what's that like? Oh, that becomes a classic dish.
Yeah.
Or basil plant to tomato. type
cantaloupe
thing.
a la Kevin. Yeah.
Yes, cantaloupe a la Kevin.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
that's not necessary. We could just eat, solid
Yeah.
protein and fiber, and we'd be, I assume, fine if we also got some nutrients and if we got some vitamins and minerals in there too. But,
Right. And we like variety, but we still go beyond variety. We experiment constantly with different dishes or trying cuisines or fusion cuisines. Did you know that there's a lot of Chinese people in Peru?
I have heard a little bit about this. Yes.
And so we went to a Peruvian restaurant in Charlotte the other week, and I noticed one of the main things they cook with is with a wok,
Neat.
which is
Even though
wild.
it's a Peruvian
So,
restaurant.
yeah, big Asian influence in Peru and other countries in that area where there were Chinese immigrants, and
Japanese immigrants too, I believe.
I believe it's Japanese. Yeah, I think you're right.
Peru,
And so
yeah.
they have a history of bringing in rice and various dishes into other, in new and exciting ways. And I always find that really fun, really fun. Or if you've ever had a banh mi, is that Vietnamese sandwich, and it's because of the French baguette that came over from French imperial colonies. The Vietnamese took the baguette and made a new sandwich with it.
That's so cool.
So it's really fun. Yeah, different flavors. So all that playfulness generates so much human culture and energy and capitalism and growth. These new areas and fields, inventions come about really through play, as you're saying. I'd forgotten that, but it's playfulness that invites possibility.
And a lot of scientists and researchers and psychologists have also been arguing over the last few decades that play is an essential part of human development as well, psychologically and emotionally, what it means to be human. I think here about Dr. Stuart Brown. Dr. Stuart Brown is really a pioneer in the area of play studies. Kevin and I had the joy of actually getting to meet him once briefly at a
Really?
play conference. Yeah, I mean, it was just to introduce myself and say hi. But really, I think he's kind of a legend in this area. And he did really groundbreaking research and some difficult research, I think, that has led to, I think, the generally accepted consensus now that if we do not have the experience of meaningful play as children, that it will it holds the potential of negatively impacting us for the rest of our lives. Yeah,
Wow.
as human beings. Yeah, that it really is an essential part of what it means to be a human. It's needed for emotional, physical, and mental development and health, and create challenges later on in life. I forget the exact story. If you're interested, you could look up again his story, Dr. Stuart Brown. But I believe he became interested in this, and he was studying the histories of people who were who engaged in really some very horrific, violent activities later on in their lives, awful acts of violence. And certainly this is not a one-to-one correspondence, and so we're not trying to say that. But he was surprised to discover in their stories and their upbringings that so many of them, there seemed to be this pattern of many of them just denied the opportunity for meaningful play as children. And yeah, so that really got him interested in how does play affect our health emotionally and mentally and socially. I believe that work also got him into contact with Jane Goodall, as you talked about animal playfulness and the work that she's done in seeing playfulness and the importance of that for the development of chimpanzees. And more recently, Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. I mentioned a few episodes back, Jonathan Haidt is the author of a book that I just recently finished reading or listening to, The Righteous Mind, about kind of why different people vote differently and think differently about political issues. But his most recent book, I think, also argues for the importance of play in developing kind of more of a non-anxious life. Though I have not read it, but I understand that's one of his central arguments. And any of that gel with you or resonate with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, kids, how you interact with them is through playing. It's an important part. Definitely, everyone can see that. It's how all children are raised in all societies is some element of play. Therapy today is often with kids and teenagers. There's some play element with it, getting them to interact with. It's just a basic way kids seem to interact with the world is playfully. It's how they begin to learn. And so if you're trying to connect with a child, play is one of the best ways of doing that. You're also reminding me, Mr. Rogers would do the puppets. And there's a few YouTube videos where he brings in a puppet with an adult, there was some guy, it was like a Johnny Carson type host interviewer, and Mr. Rogers starts doing the puppet, and you can watch the host get kind of changed because he starts talking to a puppet.
Ah, that's
right?
so interesting.
Like all of a sudden the puppet starts bringing this part out of him because it's ridiculous. It's fake, right? I mean, the thing doesn't breathe. It's not real. But somehow you just sort of start talking differently to a puppet.
That's
because
so
that's
interesting.
really an act of play, like, right? And
yeah.
there's Mr. Rogers holding it. It's just like this puppet he's got, but it's like a little, little cute little monkey with fur, and you just start,
I love that. I love that.
Can bypass
That's so great.
our normal systems.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
If we're
The
going to
mo-
that we're wired for it, it's part of our created purpose or just simply part of our wiring, however you want to phrase it, that play is essential part of human existence.
right, right.
Especially as kids. I think it's pretty obvious that kids, that's a dominant part of their structure and wiring, but it doesn't go away. It's still who we are.
Right, right. And I guess it brings up the question. I love that puppet illustration too. By the way, that's makes me think of the Muppets as well. You know, it's kind of the universal appeal of the Muppets to different ages
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That
and
was lots of adults were watching the Muppets.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it raises the question, associating play more with childhood, and there's no question that we do that. How much of that is inherent to our biology and our evolution and our development, and how much of that is something that we're taught? You know, um, I think we've discussed the after effects of the Protestant work ethic in a previous episode, and I think the argument could probably be made linking those two at least somewhat as well. Saying that play may be okay for children, but not for adults.
Right.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, so play is a ubiquitous part, universal part of the human experience. It is a driver for creativity and culture. It is important for human development, emotional, mental, physical, and some have even gone so far as to say, therefore, because of the importance of play in all of these areas, it's not a luxury. It's an essential part of what it means to be human. It's a human right. It's a human right. Um, the I may have shared. I think I shared this before in our prior podcast, but at the same play conference where I met Dr. Stuart Brown, the keynote speaker was Professor Drew Lanham, who just talked about the basic human right of play, and just that people have lived and died for play. That part of the civil rights work was to give all children the opportunity to play in the same playgrounds, right, and not to have playgrounds segregated based on the color of a child's
Swimming
skin.
pools. Yeah, these
swimming
were
pools.
places of play. There weren't swimming pools for you to exercise or something. These were pools simply for recreation and play.
Right, right.
And they were not being fairly given. Opportunities were not fair to all citizens and members of a community.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
right, yeah.
The most haunting example around a pool that I remember he shared was when a community public pool was forced to be integrated by when integration became the law of the land. The local community responded by turning the pool into a tiger pit. They put big cats in the pool. It was an awful thing. I forget the whole story. But anyway, but yes, I mean, it's play is a right because it is essential for us to be human beings and to develop as healthy human beings. And when we deny that to other people, it's cruel.
Mm-hmm.
It is cruel to deny it to others. And people have, as he said, fought and died for that right.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kevin,
Daniel.
given the fact that play is such an essential part of being human and an essential part of the human story, what are some takeaways from that? Are there, what does that mean for our day-to-day living today?
Well, we should start a podcast about it.
We should do that. And it should be called
Play, save the world.
do, 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 do. And that was our prelude to episode 3, Wired for Play. Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Daniel Hilty.
My name's Kevin Taylor.
And it's great to have you here. In our previous episodes. No, okay. That would be
But no,
bad.
we do want to introduce play in ways that make our lives more like the grasshopper, like our previous episodes have discussed, that we are more grasshopper, meaning we're more into play than we are probably aware, because we often think of ourselves as ants. And we are ants in the sense that as humans, we can build and plan and structure and save, and it's amazing what we've achieved. We can survive in deep recesses of the ocean and submarines. We can live in outer space. Like humans can do amazing things, but we're not just that. We're also creatures that like to do silly things and wear costumes and do superfluous things as well. And that's probably closer to what we really are as creatures of play. And I don't know, I hate to say silliness, but yeah, somewhat. I mean, we make comedy TV, so we like sitcoms and we like silly and comic movies, and comedy is one of the basic forms of drama, back to the Greeks.
Yeah. And you know what I say about silliness, it comes from a root word that's related to the concept of being blessed.
I didn't know that.
It comes from the same root word that in German is selig, which means blessed. Yeah.
Really?
To be silly is to be blessed in a way.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So how can we make things a little more like play? And lots of people have given some thoughts to this and written books about it, like Jane McGonigal has written a great book, Reality is Broken, and advocating her interest is more about video games. So how can we make our lives and our work more like a video game? Because in her point of view, making it gamified makes it more rewarding, where we have the possibility of failure, where we get a good feedback system as to how we're doing, because games often have a score, you know how far you've gotten, and of course, if you fail, you just start over.
Right.
And that's not something we typically do in our lives. We tend to be much more never fail, and also I'll vaguely, maybe once a year, tell you how you're doing.
Right.
At work or something.
Right. Your annual evaluation. Yeah. Kevin, it's time for I think we should do our annual evaluation right now.
Okay.
Here it is, man.
I want to hear it.
You're awesome.
You're doing a great job.
But yeah,
and interject a little seriousness there.
Yeah.
Freedom to Fail. We started a podcast called Board Game Faith, and we loved it. We thought it was great, and then we decided, okay, what if we rethink it? And so we kind of launched Gen 2, which is Play Saves the World.
Yeah.
So we had a little freedom to fail, not in the sense it was a failure, but in the sense that we wanted to redo it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Nothing lasts forever.
Nothing lasts forever.
Except sauce. Have you heard this?
The sauce is the boss.
Have you heard that? Yeah. My kids taught me this. I guess it was a meme on the internet a few years ago. Juice is temporary, sauce is forever. You're basically like, if you put orange juice in the fridge, apple juice, grape juice, eventually it's going to go bad. But sauce in the refrigerator will never go bad. Like ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, barbecue sauce, it's there forever.
Is it the vinegar, you think?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Mm.
But most things are not forever, except sauce.
Except for the sauce.
Yeah.
And Sweet Baby Ray's is the boss, which is a very popular.
Sweet Baby Ray's is the
sauce.
boss.
Sauce is the boss. Yes.
But Jane McGonigal.
Do you have?
Go ahead, yeah.
No, you.
I was just agreeing. Yeah, I mean, Jane McGonigal is such a creative thinker about how to bring these elements of play to the rest of life, even in our areas of work, right? To make it more enjoyable. Because if we are wired for play, if our hearts and our minds respond in positive ways to play, then it makes sense, even if work is not technically play, to bring some of those playful elements to work. And so she, for example, talks about ways that we can gamify, to use kind of that word, gamify our chores. You know, she talks about this game where you go on a quest and you level up in the quest and you get more experience points and hit points and things like that. The more you clean the toilet, or the more you vacuum the floor, and it's a way of charting it and keeping track of that as a way to kind of level up in life. One of my favorite examples that she gives is she made up this game called Tombstone Hold'em, which is based on Texas Hold'em poker and the importance of considering our mortality. She begins by saying, that studies have shown there are some practices that have been proven to make us happier in life. And one of them is to spend short periods of time frequently contemplating our death.
Right.
And she says as counterintuitive that is. And so, or to contemplating death. And so she built this game called Tombstone Hold'em, where based on the shape of the tombstones in a cemetery, which are the suits like clubs and spades and hearts and diamonds. The tombstones don't come in in those shapes, but you kind of, they say this shape corresponds to a club and this shape corresponds to a heart. And then the numbers on the tombstones, which can correspond to the face of a card, that you and a partner have to touch different tombstones in a cemetery that come up with a combination of suits and numbers that is greater than or beats the suits and numbers of another pair of partners in the cemetery. And so it's fun, it gamifies it, but it also just kind of gets you more comfortable around the subject of death.
Yeah.
And she says, for the purposes of just making us happier.
Yeah, and that graveyards actually want to be visited. They don't want them to be, the people that maintain and run them, they don't want them to be abandoned places. They should be places we're connected to. So they actually would like people to visit graveyards more often. So this game also achieves that goal, which is weird. You don't think about graveyards needing living people.
Right.
But it's sort of, I don't know if it's more unique in America than other places, but we're not connected to those that have died. We don't typically visit graves, at least, generally speaking. There are certainly counterexamples of that, but we don't have a Day of the Dead. We don't do, well, actually, in the old days, people used to have a homecoming day where they'd go visit the family grave and clean it up, right? I think that used to be family tradition that's largely lost. So people tend to go through the funeral and then have no connection with that grave again.
Yeah.
And that's kind of sad. And so she's trying to get people, as you said, back to being present in graveyards.
Yeah. How do you feel around graveyards, Kevin? Have they ever found
them strangely peaceful? And I enjoy if there's someone famous, I kind of like to have gone to their grave.
Yeah.
If I can. I think that's pretty neat. And I don't find them. Yeah, I think they're strangely, here in Albemarle and I think other places, Pokemon Go, if you ever played that game where you collect Pokemons.
Yeah.
They often have sites in graveyards.
Is that right?
And I don't know if that is just because it's on the map or it's along the lines of Jane McGonigal or what. Like, it might seem a little disrespectful, but actually it is getting people to get to the graveyard, and you're not harming anything. You just go in there and you have this virtual capture a Pokemon.
Interesting. Yeah.
Did you ever play that?
I played it just very briefly, not very long, but did you?
For more than you, but I eventually got tired of it because it did become a little addictive. And interestingly, my mother-in-law really got into it.
Neat.
But we all kind of got away from it. It just kind of wasn't, yeah, I don't know. But there were some really cool Pokemons to collect. I remember having a lot of excitement and fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And you could go battle. They had like places where different teams were, and you would battle and take over their lodge or something, or their gym.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
These would be virtual.
Yeah,
lodges.
it's all virtual.
Like yeah. Like
it's almost kind of like AR or VR because it's overlaid on our world, so augmented reality.
Right. That's cool. And then
Really
you
neat.
mentioned also, Kevin, before going on the air, that our friend Dave Bindewald also is an advocate for how bringing elements of play into the rest of life makes the rest of life better as well. Would you like to talk a little bit about that also?
Yeah, Dave has a real interesting approach to going into businesses and other places to get them to engage in some games, to consider how games help people and help companies and workers and others to find a lot of creativity, as we were saying earlier, to find the freedom to fail, that failure should not be the end. And in fact, failure is just a path to getting where you need to go. Reminds me, Steve Jobs said there's 1,000 no's behind every yes. He's the famous Apple computers guy that to get to the iPhone, they had to fail a lot.
Yeah.
There are lots of failures. So failures ought to be celebrated because they help you know what to say no to.
Right.
Until you can finally get to the yes, instead of, oh my gosh, you messed up. Yeah. So this creativity, team building, enjoying each other's company, failure, the people playing games together is a great way for them to bond and connect.
And sidebar, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in for like your business or organization, Dave runs this program out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you're in that area, you can look him up. He's the Center for Play and Exploration. It's a neat organization.
Yep.
And one other thing I wanted to mention that Jane McGonigal said was the ability of crowdsourcing it through play, different tasks that are too large for any one person. She talked about some journalism research that was happening. It got me thinking about, I have not read The Three Body Problem, but I watched it on TV. Have you read it or watched it?
I read it. It's wonderful.
Okay,
and I started the show, but kind of didn't get very far.
Yeah.
Partly because we were watching it with our son and he was away. So I kind of waited for him to get back, and then so it kind of was scheduling, hijack schedules. Yeah.
That makes sense. I don't understand. This may not be entirely the same thing, but there is this element in there, not to hopefully give away too much, but just of an alien presence, an alien population using a game to kind of crowdsource on a massive scale some things that they were looking for, games that humans could play. But anyway, so I just that idea of using games to kind of get work done on the side through large groups and crowds is something that Jane McGonigal mentions as well.
Yeah, and I think it might be in the sequel, the second book, but there's a whole nother plot with playing where where does the first season end without spoilers? Yeah,
Kristen, my wife, has read the books, or at least some of the books, and she watched it as well. She said that the first season of the show actually goes a little bit into book 2. So it does go beyond the end of book 1 a little bit.
Because it is about an alien invasion, and the aliens are watching, and Earth appoints some people to try to solve how to fight the alien invasion.
Yep.
And the people that start coming up with specific plans absolutely fail because the aliens have a way to stop us. But the one guy that they are scared of is the one they can't figure out what he's thinking.
Yeah.
Because he's playing. Like, he just goes and sits by a lake for 4 months.
And
they have no clue because he won't do anything. And they have no clue what he's doing. And it's kind of, I just love that bit because it is his
Yes.
non-productivity that ends up saving things.
Yes, yes.
And it's true, like the philosopher Nietzsche, he just went walking for a few years and then started writing books. Like there's lots of examples of people that seem to goof off for a while, but the whole time they were actually working on a certain level. Because through
Yeah.
playing, they were actually working. They
Yeah,
were able
yeah.
to work out a problem.
Yeah. It
So yeah,
does.
you don't save the earth by day one just writing out a 5-page plan. No, you
Right.
spend a year kind of thinking about it.
Yeah. And that little philosophical conundrum, I'm sure you know it, understand it better than I do, having read the books. But I just find it fascinating, this idea of how do you come up with a plan? Right, this alien race can basically, they can potentially hear and see everything we say and everything we do. And so are always in on whatever plans we're making. And so how do you come up with a plan? Yeah, that's right. You keep it entirely in one person's head and from beginning to end. And
Right.
that's
It's almost an interior game, which
Yeah,
reminds
yeah,
me, side
yeah.
note, again,
Yeah.
that from an earlier episode of Board Game Faith, we had the Satanic Panic and with the Geek Preacher,
Yeah,
Eric White,
yeah.
and his
Yeah.
comment and his great documentary about Satanic Panic. The goal of that was to take over our human imagination. That some elements of Christianity were so bent on control that even your mind and your fantasy life would be controlled. Like they would say, oh, you can't pretend to be a dragon master because that's
Right.
evil.
Right.
And ultimately they lost that
Right.
our minds are our own.
Right, right.
Yeah. So
Which-
yeah, you should have the freedom to pursue your thoughts and imagination how you want, as long as it, doesn't impact other people.
Yeah. Which is a good
And-
segue to our next episode. If it is true that the essence of play is one of the essential qualities of play is that it is unnecessary. It deals with unnecessary objects. And yet, if it is also true that it is a necessary part of being human, then how do we reconcile those two things? How do we reconcile the unnecessary necessary or the necessary unnecessary? And I think to try to get at that, it gets at what you were just saying, Kevin. These issues of freedom of the mind, freedom of the heart, freedom of, we might say, the soul, freedom of human flourishing, and that's going to be the topic of next episode. How we reconcile these two realities, the unnecessary and the necessity of play. And we're going to be talking about the spirit of play next episode.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. Kevin, anything else on this episode?
No, man. Check us out on Instagram, and always glad to hear from you. So email us, folks.
Yep.
Send us an email.
playsavestheworld@gmail.com. We would
Yep.
love to hear from you. And if you would like to support this podcast, you can do so and our Patreon account as well. Just check that out on our link tree on Instagram, and you can find a link there for our Patreon.
Sounds great, Daniel.
All right. Y'all are awesome. Kevin, you're awesome. Thanks so much.